Today I'm going to read Joshua 24:15, and as soon as I find the 15 in between everything else, there we go. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day, and our lives are choices all the way, whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Amen.
Well, thanks for the good send-off, and thank you for that song, Shelley. One of my favorite people. Shelley sang it, and another one of my favorite people wrote it, so it's beautiful. Well, I'm happy to be here today. I know Vernon sort of made a surprise and told everybody why I was here, but I volunteered. Something I learned a long time ago when I was very small. You never volunteer for anything you can't pay for yourself or do yourself. So after I volunteered on this, I got to thinking about that. Maybe I can't do all this by myself, but God is good, and I think the material I have today is good material. I hope you'll enjoy it. Some of it you may have heard before. I keep material from years to years. I found some dates of material, and part of this I originally put together in 1969. So if you'll forgive me for reminiscing a little bit, we'll pick up and go. You'll notice some of the material you might have heard, because some of it I used about 10 years ago here in Kingman. So, but when I was very young, my father taught me how to find my way if I was lost. And being a little old country boy, like I still am, I'm just a dumb old country kid. Among other things, he said, if you're ever out in the woods, and we lived down in the Wickiup area, and our cow pasture was down in the river bottom, and a lot of mesquite and screw-bean trees, and you couldn't see your way through there. So my dad says, if you ever get down there and get lost, follow a cow trail. It'll take you somewhere, because cows always go somewhere. Sounds like good advice, so I've used that a few times, and it works. You might get to the other end of where you want to be, but then you can turn around and follow the cow trail back the other way, and you got to the right spot. Old cowboys used to do that a lot. They don't know which way they were going, but the cows are headed for a water hole somewhere, so we'll follow them. So you go with the things you grew up learning, and some of those things are etched into our minds that we have a hard time getting rid of. I've got a few things I'll share with you today about shows how we get something fixed in our mind, and it's there, just there. You can't get rid of it. There are a few things that we get in there that we should get out once in a while. Forget about it, but it's fun. We'd like to keep it. So another thing my dad told me was, if you get lost, go back to a place you knew where you were and start over. Well, I found that was a little harder to do because I couldn't remember where I was. So I've been having a life like that quite a number of years now. Sometimes I just don't know where I am. But I've got some silly remarks I want to share with you today, and I have a poem. It's one of my favorites. It's written by a man named Sam Walter Foss. No relation to Vern, but anyway, he was a great poet from 1858 to 1911, and you'll see a lot of his work around. And what I'm trying to share with you here is one of his better poems. One day, through the primeval wood, a calf walked home as good calves should, but made a trail all bent askew, a crooked trail as all calves do. Since then, 300 years have fled, and I infer that calf is dead. But still he left behind his trail and thereby hangs my moral tale. The trail was taken up next day by a lone dog that passed that way. Then a wise bellwether sheep pursued the trail o'er vale and steep, and drew the flock behind him too, as all good Betherwellers always do. And from that day over hill and glade, through those old woods a path was made, and many men wound in and out, and dodged and turned and been about, and uttered words of righteous wrath, because it was such a crooked path. But still they followed, do not laugh, the first migrations of that calf, and through this winding woodway stalked, because he wobbled when he walked. That forest path became a lane that bent and turned again. The crooked lane became a road where many a poor horse with his load toiled on beneath the burning sun and traveled 3 miles in one. And thus a century and a half they trod the footsteps of that calf. The years passed on in swiftness fleet. The road became a village street. And thus, before men were aware, it was a city's crowded thoroughfare. And soon the central of the street was this of a renowned metropolis. And men 2 centuries and a half trod in the footsteps of that calf. Each day 100,000 route followed that zigzag calf about, and over a crooked journey went the traffic of a continent. 100,000 men were led by one calf 3 centuries dead. They followed still his crooked way, and lose 100 years a day. For such reverence is lent to well-established precedent. A moral lesson this might teach, were I ordained and called to preach. For men are prone to go it blind along the calf paths of their mind, and work away from sun to sun to do what other men have done. They follow in the beaten track, and in and out and forth and back, and still their devious course pursue, to keep the path that others do. They keep the path a sacred groove, along which all their lives they move. But how the wise old wood gods laugh, who saw the first primeval calf. Many things this tale might teach, but I'm not ordained to preach. And if you like that kind of poetry, look up some more of Sam Walter Foss. He's quite a man. One of his other favorites is The House by the Side of the Road. If you ever see that, you'll know just what we're talking about. I don't know how you were growing up, but we seem that we got in a rut. When I was in the 4th grade, I wanted to do the things the 5th graders were doing, and when I was in the 5th grade, I wanted to do what the 6th grade was doing, and all of that. But then I ran into this little poem, and then I said, that might make a good sermon, but how do you go about doing it? Well, the silly poem has a lot to do with Christian experience. Plenty. We live in a world full of traditions. Many of them about as silly as this old calf path. One of them is why do men always have to wear dark coats in hot weather? But where did that tradition come from? Why do we do these crazy things? Well, father and mother did. Well, maybe grandparents did. We have never done anything else. And the preacher told us to do it. So do we make our own path or follow the old paths made by others who have gone before, even the crooked ones? Stop and think about that. And your own upbringing, and your own following, your own Christian experience, your own married experience, whatever experience. Did you always make your own path, or did you follow in some of the others that weren't always a straight line? Took a while to get there. Israel as a nation, God's chosen people, they wandered away so many times. And it's interesting to go back and read the history of Israel. And if you think of it, they're going along even. All of a sudden, the chart would go up, and they're really up here on a high plane. Then back down, and they're way down lower than they started. And God got a hold of them again and pulled them up. But it went on for forever. They wandered and wandered and wandered. But God would always find some way to bring them back to the old paths. The Bible has many stories of God's calling man back to him. Some of these we're going to talk about today, and you've heard them before, and hopefully you can see it from a little different standpoint. As we consider some of the ways and times Israel wandered away, we think how foolish they were. Stop and think for a minute. They were following God. He gave them an extra path to go on, but they turned away from it. So we pat ourselves on the back. We would never do anything that foolish. But would we? Times are changing so fast, and it's so hard to keep up with what's changing. A few years ago, well, it's been several years ago now, my son Jim was my first boy to get out of high school, and he started off to college. He had to have his own calculator. And PUC said, "This is the one we'd like you to have." It's a TR3. Any one of you remember those? It's so obsolete now that I think we still have one kicking around our house. It makes a good adding machine. But by today's standards, we didn't change. But we need to stop and think that about this Israel. For many years, they had no king or ruler. Why? Because they were God's people. God was leading them. But they rebelled and they said, well, everybody else has a king. We want a king. So God said, elect yourself a king. So did society start downhill or uphill? It's still slightly going down. I have some Bible quotes I want to share with you today, and most of them, they maybe come from King James or New King James or the New Century Version, the early Everyday Bible, the New Living Translation, the Clear Word, and maybe even my own paraphrase. But there's some things that's come out in the Bible that seem so insignificant when you read them, but then you try to apply it to life today, and that's exactly what we're doing. Doing those same things that those silly people did so many years ago. We're following the same path, just like the people call it the calf path. Isaiah had much to say because God was speaking through him. And you think Isaiah was a very smart man? And he was. He was smart enough to listen to God and smart enough to translate it over to the other side so the people could hear it. But he turned up with this thing, and the message that the Lord gave to Isaiah the son of Amos in a vision concerning the future of Judah and Jerusalem. The Lord's plan for Israel is that the mountain on which the temple now sits will become the most important mountain in the world, and all nations will come there to worship the God of heaven. That's Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. Also in that same chapter, if, that's a little word, just two letters, I and F. Stop and think all the trouble it gets us into. If you had done it, when God always puts it in his promises. If Israel fulfills the Lord's plan, people from everywhere will say, come, let's go to Jerusalem, the house of the Lord. Let's go up to see the Lord, the God of Jacob. He will teach us what we need to know so we can walk in his path. So then things start to go downhill from there because the things we go see, we didn't take home with us. We just, that was beautiful. But then we go again. During the time of Isaiah, the people did respond and turn and follow the Lord quite frequently. Go back and read in Old Testament movements. The book of Isaiah is very, very good story form. And I did a lot of studying in the past about this, and then quite some time later, I was given a gift of Jack Blockwell's book, Clear Word. So I've gone back and done a lot of studying in the clear word. Well, Elder Blanco puts that in a language that a country boy like me can understand. And it's kind of the language we talk today. But if Israel fulfills the Lord's commands, are we fulfilling his Lord's commands? Then you jump ahead here to David. Now, we know David was just a little dumb country boy with a slingshot. But he did great things because of the power of God working through him. And as he grew older, he was still God's man. God says, he's a man after my own heart. And then we start reading some of the dumb things that David did. But he had turned away, and so many times he pleaded with the people to return to God. And throughout Psalms, David expresses the goodness of God. I like this in Psalm 16:11. This is reading from the clear word. You have shown me the path that leads to life. You have filled my life with the story of your presence. And then I wrote a note there that says, so what are you going to do about it? I think it happens to us once in a while. Something comes along that says, such an opportunity lies ahead. If you will do this. But if you don't, what happens? So as we go on and think of some of these silly things, we need to stop and realize that these people that we're talking about in Bible times, they were people like us. But they were dumb. They didn't have all this electronic gadgetry we had. If they wanted to send a letter, they had to chisel it out in steel and put it on a donkey and haul it away or something. Now, it's amazing. My young grandson just spent some time with me, and he's 11 years old. And typical little boy, and he's growing up in Europe, and all European little boys are the same way, I guess. But he carries that little gadget in his hand all the time. And you say any kind of a question, and Justin says, oh, that's so-and-so. He's really on it, the modern generations. And he says, here, Papa, I'll show you this. So he looks up and I'll show you. Wow, I didn't know that. Well, he showed me some. Did you know that? No, I never saw that before. But things are changing so fast. And are we keeping up with it? Yes, no, maybe. Or do we want to keep up with it, for that matter? What happens if we don't? If we don't keep up and go at this new pace, is God going to hold out against us? Or should we go back and follow the old path? Get all of these obstacles out of our way and follow the path that's been laid out for us. The wise man Solomon gave a lot of advice regarding which path to follow. From clear word in Proverbs 4, verse 14. Don't do what the wicked do, or walk in the footsteps of evil men. Now that's pretty wise, and that was written a few years ago. Before my time. But then in verse 18 of the same Proverbs, the path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn. Their way gets brighter as the morning progresses, with the full light of day. And then verse 26 and 27 says, think carefully about which direction you're going and walk only on solid ground. Don't swerve to the right or to the left. God had told Solomon that. Solomon told it to the people. The people did it sometimes. And that's where we are today. We get these messages from whomsoever, and we'll do it, a little bit of it, or all of it sometimes, or never all of it, but a little bit sometimes. Isaiah, and Isaiah chapter 26, verse 7, this is from the clear word. The Lord makes the way of the just smooth. The path of the righteous is made level. Well, since I've been banged up and I can't walk around on level ground, I I'd like to find those kind of paths. They're smooth and they're not lopsided. But are the new paths always better than the old ones? Stop and think about that. I have a diary that one of my aunts, my father's younger sister, wrote of the migration of the Boyett family from Texas to Arizona by wagon train. And it's a daily diary that Aunt Laura wrote, and it's amazing. And she'd say, we stayed at such and such a place tonight, and in the morning we're going to go down to the creek and wash some clothes, and then we're going to try to make to Blanco Point tomorrow night or whatever. And I asked my dad, well, how far away was that? He said, oh, about 14 miles. My daughter Brenda is involved with a worldwide agency called Operation Blessings. And she retired 4 years ago. She retired on a Thursday. Well, on the next Monday morning, she was in Texas with cleaning up after Hurricane Harvey. And she hasn't slowed down since. We were talking just a few days ago, and she was driving my truck, and she said, how many miles does this truck have on it when you got them? I don't know, 19,000, I think, or something like that. And she said, well, mine had 19,000 on it when I bought it, and now it's got 148. For most of her going, she drove her own vehicle. Well, now they've changed things around a little bit. She became a payroll employee, not just a volunteer. So they pay her airfare and whatever now. She doesn't have to drive her own truck. But she left here, one morning this past week, left at 3 o'clock in the morning, heading for Northern California, because her boys were going to be racing at the Sonoma Raceway at noon. I said, that's cut a little fine, isn't it? She said, oh, no, I can make that fine. Well, for me, it's about an 8-hour drive. Brenda's over about 6.5. But things are changing in our own individual lives that we just can't keep up with it. It's unbelievable. But we have to stop and think. Think carefully about which direction you're going and walk only on solid ground. Don't swerve to the right or to the left. Having grown up around here, Highway 66 used to go Ropeman Hill and down to Topak and across the bridge there. Well, that road was there for, I don't remember how many years it was used as the main highway, but something like 80 years or something. And they had 2 vehicle deaths on that road and all that time going over Ropeman Hill. Well, they rerouted Highway 66 around the mountain up through the valley, which eventually became Interstate 40. But in the first year that 66 was around the valley, there was 22 deaths on the highway. Going zoom because there's wide open spaces. Going over Ropeman Hill, you had to slow down a little bit to make the curves. And our life's that way now. As we were coming along, we thought about, well, we can't go up over that mountain. We're going to have to go around it. So you see a lot of old roads and burro trails or whatever that go around. And that's like a silly poem. It takes a mile to get around that. Now today you'd bore a hole through it and go straight through. But things are changing, and we, I guess, need to keep up with it. But then Isaiah says, and this kind of perks me up a little, the path of the righteous is made level. Boy, Ruby, do you have trouble walking on level ground? We've talked about that a little bit. I can go upstairs pretty good. Downstairs is terrible. But in the book of Job, might run a little late on time, but I want to share something with you from Job. And this is the part of chapter 1 of the book of Job, and this comes from the clear word. In the land of Uz there lived a man named Job. He was blameless and upright. He loved God with all his heart, and he hated evil. He had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 1,000 oxen for plowing, and 500 donkeys. In addition, he had a very large number of servants. He was the richest man in that part of the East. It was the custom of his sons to take turns throughout the year having a feast for everyone in the family who wanted to come, and including their 3 sisters and their families. They would eat and drink and have a good time together. At certain times of the year, Job would send for his children and ask them to recommit themselves to the Lord. Early that day, he would sacrifice a lamb for each of them, asking God to forgive them, just in case any of them had sinned it secretly from God, whether they did it intentionally or not. So in heaven, the representatives of other places, planets, in God's created universe came together regularly to meet with him. And one day, Satan came also with him and presented himself for admittance, and he came to accuse God of being partial to Job. God said to Satan, on what basis do you want to attend this meeting? So the accuser said, I represent the planet Earth and have been attended for there in a long time. The Lord says, no, that's not true. Haven't you noticed my servant Job? There's no one like him, loyal, blameless, faithful in all he does. He loves me with all his heart and hates whatever is evil. Oh, the accuser says, do you think he does that for nothing? You've protected him and his family, give them everything they have. You've blessed them wherever he goes and given him more herds and flocks than anyone else in the whole area. But if you take everything away that he has, he'll turn against you like everyone else and curse you to your face. The Lord says, okay, very well. Let's try your theory. Everything he has is now in your hands, only don't lay one finger on the man himself. The accuser went back and agreed. So read the rest of the book of Job. It's very interesting. And Job never once put any blame on God for all the things. He just basically lost everything. And it's so interesting that in comes one bunch of people, oh, Job, all your sons and daughters were at one of the boys' house, and the house fell down on top of all of them. That didn't deter him away from worshiping God. David wrote so many things in the Psalms 25, verse 10, David says, all the paths are mercy and truth to such as keep the covenant. Everyday Bible says all the Lord's ways are loving and true. And I have to say, that is so true. If you've ever wandered away from what we call the straight road, the straight and narrow, then you see things going on out there in the world that's not as much fun as they look like they are. In Proverbs we read, God is talking here, I've taught you all I know and have guided you along right pathways. If you walk in them, you will not stumble. If you run, you will not fall. What does that if represent? If you will do it my way. So, again, reading from Isaiah chapter 42, states that God's promises that he will build he will lead the blind along roads they have not known and guide them along paths that are new to them. I will turn their darkness into light and make the rough road spots smooth. Have you ever had any rough spots in your life? How many of you have not had a bad thing in your life? I don't see anybody saying. I think we've all had some rough time somewhere. So, have you been groping along in darkness? Here's the answer for you. Listen to what others have said who have gone before you and have told or tried to teach you. Let God lead. I think that's the key to a lot of our downfalls now. I want to do it my way. Again, Isaiah saying, the Lord shall guide you continually, and they that follow shall build the old places. Thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the paths to follow. According to Isaiah 3, we're to make a highway for our God. And I thought that was interesting, and you go back and I read that, and Isaiah actually does say we are to make a highway for God. We are to be the one presenting the message, making the roadmap. So if you pick up and go on that a little bit, you'll see that we're making the roadmap by not just drawing out a map for others to follow, but by being an example in the lives we live. And that, friends, is the challenge of today in this crazy modern world we live in. What kind of example are we setting to those people we come in contact with? We talked about that in our Sabbath school lesson this morning. This is going to be an interesting quarter of Sabbath school lessons. But we wander so far away from where we should be, and yet all the time we're thinking we're absolutely correct. I don't know. I can't always figure that out. But John the Baptist was a highway maker for the Lord. And all the gospel writers wrote about his work. For instance, Matthew says, make a smart road for the king, or make a smooth road for the king. And then Mark and Luke both say, repair the road for the Lord. And then John says, smooth out the road. The king is coming. So I think we're living in that era now. The king is coming. Are we grading the roads? Sometimes I wonder. There's so much animosity among leaders, among parent teachers and students and whatever. And unfortunately, it's infiltrated our church organization, not just our Kingman Church, but our church organization. We're getting to be like the rest of the world. We're criticizing our leaders. Yeah, should have done that. We should have done that. We shouldn't criticize them. We need to thank them. It's not always easy being a leader. I've been joking the last few months about I knew Vern Foss when he didn't have gray hair. And when he became head elder with an absentee pastor, you notice his hair started getting gray. And I think he's going to pass me up one of these days. But leaders do all they can to help us. But we don't support them. Not just church leaders. How about all that's going on in the world about badgering the politicians, the people that we voted into office, and now they're, maybe just because we didn't vote for them, we think they're the worst people they could be. But maybe they're doing a good job. I think the big thing relies in our attitude towards things. Attitude is the biggest thing we stumble over. We need to pray that our attitude will be better and learn to accept the things that lie before us. We're on a crossroad where Israel was on many occasions. One of those is recorded in Jeremiah chapter 6. God is speaking through Jeremiah, and again here I'm reading from the clear word. You're standing at the crossroads. Stop and take a look. Which way are you going to go? Look for the old ways, those ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it. You'll find rest for your souls, and peace will come to your land. Was that just for that period of time? Or was that for 2019? the 21st century we're living in. Many times God has called and given promises to those who would follow. You just can't imagine the examples if you take it and try to figure out all this, and you sit down at the computer and you start looking up things of God's people that God had them to do. In Jeremiah chapter 7, here again, God is talking through Jeremiah. When I brought your ancestors out of Egypt, I didn't just tell them about sacrifices and offerings. I also told them about the importance of obedience. I said to them, obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in my ways, that all will be well with you. And you know, every time in history that they walked with the Lord, everything was well for Israel as a nation. Then poof, they're down, scrambling again. They didn't listen or pay attention to what I said. They did whatever their stubborn and evil living hearts told them to do. Instead of becoming better, they became worse. From the day your ancestors left Egypt, I have sent my servants, the prophets, again and again to help them. But your ancestors didn't listen to them or pay attention to what they said. Each generation has become more stubborn. I always wonder if it's each one generation all the way up to today. Our generation, have we become more stubborn than their sides? They've become more stubborn and done more evil than the previous ones. Then the Lord said to me, Jeremiah, I want you to tell the people everything I've said, but they won't listen to you. You'll call, but they won't answer. And I wrote myself a note over on the side. Wow, how well does God know modern people? You hear these things and, well, that's not for me, that's for the neighbor across the street. I'm a much better situation than that. He doesn't talk to me like that. Then Jeremiah, again, God talking, I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. For several years, as a habit, I've written things. When I get a new Bible, I go back and take all the written notes on the back flyleaf of my old Bible and put it on the new one. Well, now when the new Bible gets full, it's 2 or 3 pages I have to transfer. But I have taken the challenge that I've offered of you before. Write a list of the good parts and the bad parts, and see which list gets longer. My list just goes on and on and on. Oh, I've had lots of problems. I could sit down here right today, and I could probably write you at least 100 things that's gone wrong for me in the last 20 years. But how many things have gone good? There was a cartoon a while back in the newspaper. Charles Schultz, Peanuts, and Snoopy set out he was going to write his memoirs. So he was in the typewriter, and Charlie Brown says to him, what are you doing, Snoopy? Well, I'm writing my memoirs. So then he come back later, Snoopy, what are you doing? Well, I'm writing my life history. Come back later, what are you doing? I'm writing about my own life. And then the last thing he says, what are you writing now? An index. Well, why are you doing that? Well, I only have one sheet of paper. So, I think that's why we give up. We only have one sheet of paper. When you start listening to good things, you run out of anything to write it on. I will put my laws into their minds and write them in their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Zechariah says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I saved my people from the east country and from the west country. This is from King James. And I will bring them, and they shall dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God in truth and in righteousness. Second Chronicles. I had to go back and read this one several times, and then I looked through the Bible and I found almost the same quotation several other places, but this is 2 Chronicles 7:14 from the clear word. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land. You notice how many times that little word "if" comes into play? God's promises are great promises. And I've talked for you before about the number of promises in the Bible, 5,373. And to the best of my knowledge, they're all conditional. I've sat for hours looking up the promises of God, according to great writers in the past, mostly a few years ago, Glenn Kuhn. But those promises are always, if you will, I will. If you will follow me, I will be your people. This is, I don't know how to explain it. We just don't like to do that. Elijah. We all heard about Elijah. He'd followed many paths and done many great things for God. And down towards the last, he was on Mount Carmel, and he made a lot of noise and rattled the saints of Baal and joked with them. Maybe you're not calling loud enough. Yell louder. Maybe your gods are sleeping. Dump more water on and that kind of thing. Well, he prevailed there. But then shortly after that, this word came out against him. Let's see if I can put my finger on here. Anyway, I thought I had it marked, but I don't. But basically, word got back to Jezebel what he had done. And Jezebel sent a message out to him. If the gods don't deliver me by tomorrow, I will search you and hunt you down and kill you. So what happens? Joshua took off running. And one of the versions I read yesterday afternoon, that he ran fast as he could out of town. I don't remember which version it was, but it was kind of one of the modern ones. So then all through the, chapters 18 and 19 of 1 Kings tells all about that. Ahab got to the place where he told everything Elijah had done, and Jezebel. Here's Jezebel's message. May the gods strike me dead if I don't hunt you down tomorrow and kill you. So during the night, the messenger found Isaiah fast asleep in the city wall and woke him up and told him what Jezebel had said. Elijah got up and ran for his life. Then as he got to Beersheba on the outside of the wilderness, about 100 miles south, he told his servant to stay behind and he was going ahead. So he continued walking for another whole day, and he found a tree with a good shade. And he slumped under that tree and he says, Lord, I can't take it anymore. Please let me die. I scored a good score for you on Mount Carmel, but I'm no better than my ancestors. Now I'm running from a woman. Lord, let me die. Discouraged and disappointed in him, Elijah lay down and went to sleep. And I love this part of the story. I've heard it so many times, and you probably have too. An angel woke him up and says, "Sit up, Elijah. I've brought you something to eat." And the angel disappeared. So Elijah opened his eyes and looked and saw some freshly cooked bread on hot stones and set beside a jug of water. So he sat up and ate and drank and then laid back down and went back to sleep. After a while, the angel returned and touched him and says, "You have a long way to go, so I brought you more food." And then he disappeared. So when he took off and he ran from there, getting away from that place till he got to Mount Sinai. And when he arrived, it was late in the afternoon. He slipped into one of the caves to spend the night. Then the Lord said to him, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah answered, I know I'll be safe here on the mountain. I've been very zealous for you and the honor of your name. And I've tried to lift you up as God of Israel and get the people to worship you and you alone. They have broken your covenants and they have torn down their altars and the prophets, they've killed all your prophets. What looked like a revival reformation didn't change. Jezebel's out to get me. She's the only one left. She's still in charge of things, out to kill the prophets, and I am the only one left, and she's determined to find me and kill me. Sometimes when we talk to the Lord, we rattle it off so fast, the Lord, I wonder how the Lord understands it. If we just sit and talk quietly. God, this is the problem I'm having. Show me which way to resolve it. But the Lord said to Elijah, go stand outside the cave as I came by. So Elijah went outside, and as he stood there, a strong wind came from the direction of the Lord's voice and hit the side of the mountain with such force that there were some rocks loose. But the Lord was not in that wind. After the wind, an earthquake, and the whole mountain shook. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came flames that scorched the mountain so that Elijah ran back in and for protection. But the Lord was not in the fire. Suddenly all was still. Then he heard a quiet, gentle voice. Outside, all was quiet. It was the voice of the Lord. Elijah pulled his mantle over his head and stood at the entrance of the cave, and the Lord says, what are you doing here? Elijah says, Lord, I have been very zealous for you and have protected your name, but the children of Israel have broken your covenants and torn down your altars and killed your prophets. I'm the only one left. Now they're after me. In the same small, quiet voice, this is what God said. I want you to go back to Israel the same way you came. And every time I read that verse, or maybe not every time, but every once in a while I read that verse, I think of an old football story. And since I'm not a real sports fan, I don't remember all the details. But basically the story goes, it was a great big game, the last game of the big season, playoffs. And so they run out on the field and had this greenhorn pass receiver out there, and the quarterback threw the pass, and he caught it. Man, everybody was just cheering and yelling, and then all of it started booing and booing and booing. The poor guy ran to the wrong end of the field, to the wrong goalpost. So he was so humiliated, he went back into the locker room, and the coach came in there and said, just like what God said to Elijah, what are you doing here? And the boy says, I messed up. I lost the game for everybody. I can't do it. And the coach says, go back out there on the field. The game is not over. So we get to that point in our lives. We can't go any farther. We think it's done. But it's surprising what the Lord will do for you after you have found that there's all you could do. Then going on down here in verse 18, the Lord says, there are still 7,000 people scattered throughout Israel who have not worshipped Baal. They have refused to kneel down in front of him and have not gone up to kiss his carved image. Elijah, I'm the only one left. What am I going to do? So then go back to the beginning, or sort of. Go back to Jeremiah 6:16, and we'll read the verse again. We're going to read the entire verse. The Lord said, you're standing at the crossroads. Stop and take a look. Which way are you going? Look for the old ways, those ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it. Then you'll find rest for your souls, and peace will come to your land. But you keep saying to me, we will not walk in those paths. Well, that's a rendition from Clearword. New Living Translation says, no, that's not the road we want. And Everyday Bible says, we will not walk on that way. So when I come down today to ask myself and you, where are you? Are you at a crossroad? I think every day we're coming to some crossroad in our life. Which way will you go? Try the old, tried and true, those seemingly long, crooked ways, or what appears to be the straight, fast, easy way to get there. Shortcuts are not always the shortest way. I could spend all afternoon telling you about shortcuts I've tried that just didn't work out. They're as fast as I thought it would be. The decision is yours. God is calling you. What will you do? Whatever your path that you choose, be sure it's God's path, and that He's walking with you and you with Him. It's got to be a team. You've got to walk with God and He with you, or God will walk with you and you with Him. Whatever. But me and Jesus got to have our own thing going. I don't care what anybody else says. If you don't have a personal relationship with God through Jesus, you're sort of out in the cold. I want to close with some verses here that come from Paul's letter to the Colossians. Colossians chapter 3, and this is from Clearword, beginning with verse 12, if you want to mark this down. God loves you dearly and has set you apart as His own, and He wants you to be compassionate, kind, humble, gentle, and patient. Be tolerant of one another and forgive whatever grievances you may have against each other, even as Christ has forgiven you. Above all else, love one another. This will band all of you together in unity. Let the peace of Christ, peace that only Christ can give you, be with all your decisions. This is what God had in mind when He called you to function as one body. And I love this sentence here. We ought to be thankful for the kind of fellowship we have, which so many others don't. I think we could boil that right down to our own families, and particularly our church family, our Adventist movement. Thankful for the kind of fellowship we have. So many other organizations are so loose-knit and torn apart. May the message of Christ in all its riches fill your hearts as you encourage each other with the Scriptures and by the singing of hymns and gospel melodies with gratitude in your hearts towards God. Everything you do, in speech or in action, do in the name of the Lord Jesus, thanking God for what He has done through the gift of His Son. We need to get that in mind. We need to have a personal relationship with God. I've chosen for closing psalm an old song that is something that really touches me, even as I read the words and think about it. But before I get to that, I want to share something with you. I hope I have it. If I don't have it, I won't share it with you. I thought about it as the last thing. There it is. I had to go back and look this morning as I was walking out the door. Quite a number of years ago, our family had sort of adopted two Bible verses that were going to be our family thing we lived on. And both of them come from the writings of Paul in the book of Romans, both from the 8th chapter. Verse 18 says, and Paul says, I reckon that the worst things that's happened to us are not anything to worry about compared to what's coming in the season. And my kids were quite small and says, you make that sound like some old farmer talking. I reckon so. But then the other one is Romans 8:28, which we fell in love with. Paul says, all things work together for good to those that love the Lord. When my son was a sophomore or junior, I guess, down at Thunderbird Academy, and I was counting up as Norm Severance was one of the teachers. He was much younger than he is now. I was thinking, my son is going to be 69 in October. So he wrote this when he was about 17. So it's been our family song for many years. I'll read the words with you. When you get discouraged, you've done the best you can, just try to remember that God has a plan. He will lead your life if you ask him to. Just take his promise as your own and he will see you through. Verse 2, when Jesus leads your life, everything may not be smooth, but if you could see the end of time, these very things you would choose. So do not be discouraged when everything looks dim. Just take his promise as your own and live your life for him. Then verse 3 says, when your life feels hopeless, you don't know what to do, just give your burden to the Lord. He'll carry it for you. When doubt is taking over and bitterness comes through, just don't give up on Jesus. He won't give up on you. And the chorus to be sung between all those. For we know that all things work together if we love the Lord. All things work together for our good. If we love the Lord, then we know things will turn out right. All things work together for our good. And I can see that more and more in my life, that all things that happen in my life are for my good. I'm like everybody else, I complain a lot, but I stop and count my blessings a lot too. So as we close our little discussion here today, I want to use song number 296, Lord, I'm Coming Home. And singers, if you'll come up and do this for me, I'd like to just use the first 3 verses of that song today. And if while we're singing it, you feel like you would like to rededicate your life, signify to the Lord that you'd like to do that.